Welcome to the Firestarter podcast. People, ideas, and conversations that move us forward. I'm your host, Willa Kammerer, and it's my passion, my purpose, and my business to make the world a better place through storytelling, which is why we're here today. We'll talk to mission-driven entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and investors, thought leaders, researchers, and experts on the front lines of the world's most pressing issues about designing and thriving in careers of impact. My guest today is Hans Manzke, author of the inspirational leadership book For All, Democratizing Big Ideas. Hans is a principal at The Clearing, a small Washington, D.C. based management consulting firm focusing on partnerships that unlock true transformation. With over 15 years of experience in coaching, team development, and strategy across the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. His book speaks to all types of leaders looking to access the next version of themselves by better understanding their networks and environments through the lens of big ideas. Hans advocates for both rising and established leaders based on his core belief that humans are the strongest when bringing their full selves to creating positive change. Drawing upon his own personal strength and vulnerability, he endeavors to help people use their stories, curiosity, and network to create better outcomes and unlock higher levels of performance. In today's conversation, we discuss the power of curiosity, networks, and radical self-honesty in relation to our professional and personal lives. I'm so excited to bring you this conversation with Hans and hope that it inspires the leader in all of you. Hi, Hans. Welcome to the show. So thrilled to have you here.
Good morning, Will. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So you are a principal at the DC-based management consulting firm, The Clearing, which is a very interesting seeming place. And you're the author of For All, Democratizing Big Ideas, which I just love the title and the philosophy behind it. And we're going to delve into that more deeply a bit later in our conversation. But, first a little context here. We met at Middlebury College, and in reading a bit more about your background through your book and just our conversations, I understand that we were both drawn there for the liberal arts college experience, the opportunity to explore many things, follow our curiosity, and also explore the interconnections between disciplines and ideas. And it seems like curiosity has been a real through line for you. I'd just love for you to reflect on that, how curiosity has really played a role in your pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. One story that I'll open with, it's near the beginning of my book, is as a young boy, one of the things that fascinated me the most, I would say, is this strange effect that I noticed in our home. And I lived in a home with my mom and dad and my brother in San Antonio, Texas. It's an old house built in the 30s, I believe. And in my parents' bedroom, there is a little alcove where their closets are, and two full-length mirrors facing each other. So you could kind of stand in the middle. And one thing that I noticed as a young boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I would say, is that if you look into one of those two mirrors, you will see the reflection of the other mirror, and it's kind of an infinity of reflections is how I thought about it as a child. So receding off into the distance with seeming no end is the reflection of the other mirror. So it looked like actually a hallway of mirrors going both ways, which blew my mind, completely fascinated me as a young boy. And the question that popped into my mind pretty much every time that I stood there and gazed into that mirror was, why? Why does this happen? What's behind this? What's the I didn't have the words for it yet, but like, what's the science? What's the cause that makes this strange thing happen in the world? And growing up, I both my mom and my dad were high school teachers, now retired, but I had this deep and abiding sense that I could ask them pretty much any question and get an answer, a satisfactory answer. So I did that a lot, asked a lot of why questions. And that sense of curiosity is a big part of what underpins my book and that effort, also my decision to undergo that process. So that's a little bit about my kind of natural sense of curiosity. And I still now in my career, in my life as a more or less grown adult, ask those why questions probably every day. So that sense of curiosity is alive and well.
I love that. So walk us through your pathway after college, your career pathway that led you to where you are today.
Yeah. Like a lot of things, right, post college, and starting to embark into the working world, I had a general sense of some things I was interested in, but certainly did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. That's for sure. So one of my good friends that I grew up with in San Antonio, Texas, had moved to DC as well, and knew about this company, which was the predecessor to the Clearing, and said, look, hey, they're interviewing, they're trying to find good young people, some people right out of college that are good writers, good speakers, good listeners, etc. I didn't know how to spell business or management consulting, but I said, sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. Again, that sense of curiosity, right? I wanted to learn a little bit about this thing that I knew nothing about. And that's how I actually got into this field. So a little bit of luck, a little bit of being in the right place at the right time, knowing a good person. As I said, like a lot of things happen post college. So that's kind of how I got into this field. And the last 16 or 17 years or so have been just a lot of exploration and curiosity, discovering new things, new types of work, new people, new areas to apply what I'm learning within. And that's kind of how I got here. So as I've reflected on my career so far, kind of, a little ways in, one of the things that stands out to me is how fortunate I've been, how lucky I have been, and how much being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people has positively affected my career. And especially how much that is not the case for everyone and for a lot of people. So that was one of the things that I was holding as I thought about writing this book. And what I wanted to write it about is how can I give back a little bit to people who maybe were not in the right place at the right time or had less access than I did. And so that's something that's been important to me throughout my career, and something that I tried to express in my book as well.
Definitely. Yeah. So this idea of democratizing, how did you come to that? Because, you could have decided to write just for a professional audience, which would have been, writing a book is a noble endeavor. But I appreciate that you did have that. I'd love you to just kind of reflect on that a little bit more.
Definitely. Yeah. The one of the reasons that approach to this project was important to me is just as I said, right? With the benefit of hindsight and some perspective now in my life and career, it's just a bright flashing neon light type sign in my head that says you've been extremely, extremely fortunate. And you've benefited from a lot of knowing the right person, again, being in the right place, et cetera. And that's not the case for most people, not just for some. And as I was thinking about kind of toying with ideas for this book, I've always loved ideas, and there's a handful of ideas that have pivoted my career, my life. And so I knew I wanted to do something with that, right? And what I was really lacking a hypothesis, right? It's like, great, you've got a handful of ideas. That's interesting. But so what? And so as I reflected, this idea of democratization kind of floated to the surface for me. And I've been doing a lot of work in the equity and inclusion space lately. And so this felt like a really natural connection point, and also just a way that I could give back to the brilliant people that I have worked with, lived alongside, and especially more lately in my career that I've met as I've done some coaching work too with younger people in the leadership development space. So that was a little bit about the hypothesis of this idea of democratization and kind of leveling the playing field from an equity perspective, which every day that goes by becomes more and more important to me.
Definitely. Well, many threads to continue exploring on the book front. I just kind of back to your kind of pathway. I understand you also, took a couple of turns that, before you got to the consulting, journalism publishing. Is that right? So it wasn't
That's right.
that there were a couple of, tributaries before you kind of arrived at the main event. And, what did you learn through, your stops along the way?
That's a great question. The short answer is I learned what I did not want to do with those, following those tributaries. So that's a great analogy, I would say. As right when I got when we graduated from Middlebury, I was pretty convinced that my future lay somewhere in the journalism world. So I gave that a shot. After I moved to DC, I was a freelance journalist for a couple of small publications here, and I learned pretty quickly that the way that work was framed was not for me. And what I mean by that is the mostly the pace of the work. I found it difficult to be thoughtful in a really short-term deadline-based way of working, and so after a year and a half or so of doing that, pretty quickly realized that was not for me, right? I enjoy the writing, but not the work and the approach. And you mentioned publishing as well. So I worked as the most junior book editor of all time, I would say, at a publisher here in DC called CQ Press, Congressional Quarterly. And again, right, learned for different reasons, because of different things, that work was not for me. But as I look back on it, I'm very grateful for both of those experiences. And that's something that I've taken with me throughout my career is trying things out, right? Experimenting and learning about new things and trying new approaches, trying on new ideas, etc. Oftentimes what's most valuable from those experiences is, great, now I have this kinesthetic thing, right, that I can think about and call on, and maybe it was something I really enjoyed and maybe not, right? But I'm taking something important away from that and course correcting, thinking about how I want to proceed from here. So that's a little bit more about background from me management consulting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this, I think learning through contrast is a really powerful thing in our lives, learning, okay, that's not how I want to feel. That's not how I want my day-to-day, rhythms to be. And that's not what I want to engage with. And I have to imagine it's just given you more clarity and conviction, about everything that you're doing now and the sense of alignment that you feel, in your current work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's easy, especially in the last 2.5 years here, to feel and be overwhelmed. I know it is for me. So much is going on in our work and personal lives. And the boundaries, I think, most importantly for me at least, are even more blurry than they ever have been before, right? They were never super clear for me by design, mostly beforehand. But with the lack of that clarity and focus sometimes, I so value the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to just cross this one thing off of this infinite list of potential options, things, areas, forking paths, etc. So I think that's a big piece of learning for me. Absolutely.
Definitely. I mean, let's talk about this a little bit. We are, recording in this exceptional time. We're kind of about to enter, the second year of the pandemic. We're kind of back in the midst of another surge. How have you been navigating it? How has it been for you? And I think we all started to sort of return to a semblance of a newer normal, but kind of getting on with our lives. And then, here we are again. And that's hard to get comfortable with. And there's a lot of uncertainty on the horizon. So I also feel like these big ideas that you talk about in your book, they help us, they help us with their big ideas. They're kind of timeless human questions and frameworks, and they help us navigate some of these uncertainties and life's biggest questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great framing. I would say how I think about it is, the last 2.5 years here, simultaneously the best of times and the worst of times is how I think about it. So much of our shared experience in this during the pandemic has been the the hardship and the negativity and the tragedy that I think has surrounded us all as we have very, very painfully learned um, about the situation, what we can and cannot do, and approaching this from a public health perspective. That's hard, and there's a lot of shared trauma there, to be frank. And the also at the same time, there has been, for me personally and for my loved ones, a lot of goodness and a lot of layered positivity, I would say, that's been built in these last couple of years. And the book writing effort is a perfect example of that. I do not know. I don't know if I would have been able to complete that in the way that I did in the time that I did without COVID and the coronavirus. I liken it to something that a lot of people say is, if I just had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months alone in a cabin in the woods with a typewriter, I could do this, right? If I had that sense of solitude and focus and all of those things, then this is something that I could do and tackle. And that's exactly how I felt in the early days of 2020 when I was really diving headfirst into the book writing effort. So that sense of, frankly, of disconnection in the early days was a great gift for me in that very strange and particular way. So as I said, best of times and worst of times, but I love your characterization too of the ideas that are in this book. Those are the ones that have been big tipping points for me personally and professionally, and I think that they are more important and more vital now than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the same thing about launching this podcast. It was, I believe, August of 2020 that I first had the idea, as I was out for a hike, masking as I passed passerbys on the trail in New Hampshire, and, had this, I just really wanted to, connect with people and ideas. And I think if there hadn't been this space created by our kind of virtual environment and just the kind of shakeup of our rhythms, I don't know that I would have felt the same need and interest in connecting. And I think I also would have found a lot of roadblocks, like, I need to figure out how to record it in person, and that's a lot to do technically. And but we were thrown into this virtual world, and in some ways it made connecting like this a lot easier and a lot more normal.
Yeah.
So I'd love to, dive more into the substance of the book. Can you talk about some of the big ideas that you outline in your book, and particularly the ones that have had the biggest personal impact in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just name a few. There's around about 10 or so different big ideas in the book, kind of discrete ideas that I take a deep dive into. I'll just name 2 or 3 right now that are really standing out for me personally right now, especially at this part in that kind of the post-publication process, and with some of the really cool conversations that I've gotten to have with friends and family and clients in the work in my life around the book. So probably the one that is showing up most for me, and it's funny, Will, you made me think about it again when you're talking about what is this time in the pandemic been like. Especially early in the book writing process, this one was number 1 and 2 and 3, I would say, and that's imposter syndrome, which is an idea and a concept that a lot of people are familiar with. What I would say is, throughout my career, and maybe more right now than ever before, that is showing up for me. The classic way that it manifests, right, showed up for me as I was writing and then publishing this book. Who am I to write a book? What do I have to share with the rest of the world that would be worthwhile, interesting? No one will care. There's 150,000 people probably in a 10-mile radius that have better stories, more important perspectives, on and on and on and on and on, right? All of those insidious ways that the idea of imposter syndrome shows up. And I guess for me, what was most surprising and most validating at the same time was I knew it was a thing. I knew that it wasn't just something that I was experiencing, although that was a relatively recent kind of discovery for me personally. But as I was doing research on the book, hearing the stories and the anecdotes from people from two different perspectives. One, people that in my life that have helped lead me and lead organizations that I respect immensely, suffering through that same sense of imposter syndrome that I did, and then also people that I would say that are some household type names that by anyone's measure in any time, I think that we would all consider to be luminaries and highly overwhelmingly successful, right? This idea of imposter syndrome shows up the exact same way for them. So for me, there was a lot of comfort in that sense of, I think I always knew it wasn't just me, but seeing it on paper, hearing it out loud, and hearing people talk through it was a big shift for me. So, imposter syndrome is one that I think is showing up really big for me right now. The other one that I'll highlight really quickly is an idea that comes from the Japanese island of Okinawa, and it's called ikigai. And it's the intersection of a number of items, but basically what it boils down to is thinking about and being radically attuned to your personal purpose, right? So, especially here in the West, we equate purpose and value in lots of different ways. But a really common one is I am professionally and financially successful, which is not nothing, but that is just one of the four kind of points on the compass. I like to think of them the four cardinal points: north, south, east, and west for ikigai, and it lies at the middle of a number of different characteristics. So ways that you can contribute to the well-being of others, what you can be financially successful at or with, and other factors as well. And it's an idea. It's a thing that almost down to a man and a woman on the island of Okinawa in Japan. If you said, talk to me about what your ikigai is, what is this deep sense of personal purpose in a larger context as well, and how do you fit into that? They can rattle that off to you right off the top of their head, right? And find ways to align what they do on a day-to-day basis, their personal relationships, connect all of those things back into their own personal ikigai. So again, it was a big idea, right? There's a lot in that to unpack, and there's this big sense of gravity for me with that idea and all of the others in my book as well that just really draws me to them, right? You can take a lot of complexity and boil it down to something really elegant that's relatively easy to wrap your head around. So those are two that stand out for me right now: imposter syndrome and ikigai.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up ikigai. It was definitely on my list of things that I wanted to discuss with you because similarly, I was really struck by that concept when I first learned about it a couple of years ago. I think I read an article about it and ended up just writing. I kind of can't help myself. I just have tons of white sticky notes everywhere with scribbles and notes and quotes and, and one of them was just, this white sticky note within, a red marker, just ikigai. And I didn't know how to pronounce it until I looked it up last night. But, and then it felt so serendipitous, when I read your book about a year ago or whenever it was that it came out. And I saw that and I saw the Venn diagram, which I hadn't seen before. And just, was again, similarly struck by it. Is there an exercise that listeners can go through to try to kind of understand this for themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've got a copy of my book. I'm going to leaf through it just so I can quickly show the image if I can find it. But there absolutely is. That's a great question. What I would say is, and I want to find the Venn diagram image because just to use as a, here we go, I found it. Let me hold it up. So yeah, so you can see the ikigai image there. The one way that you can do an exercise is just recreate a version of this Venn diagram on a piece of paper, maybe a whiteboard, chalkboard, whatever you have handy, essentially, and do an exercise, right? That sounds like we're both pretty familiar with. Just find a bunch of sticky notes, draw up a blank Venn diagram, and replicate this image that's in the book here. And then think about those prompts, right? What am I good at? And just brainstorm, right? Jot down on a sticky note what comes to mind with, well, okay, I'm good at X and Y and Z and 1, 2, 3, right? Write those up and move them into that part of the Venn diagram. And basically, I think about it as responding to each of the 4 prompts, right, that are in that 4-sided Venn diagram that is the ikigai image. So what you're good at, what you can be paid for, what your passion, right? What makes you feel excited to wake up in the morning, and just thinking about each of those as a prompting question, and jotting down your ideas on a sticky note, right? So the really interesting part then comes in the intersections in between those spaces, right? Well, what is something that I am both passionate about and that I'm actually good at? I excel in this thing that I am passionate about, right? Like thinking about the overlaps in those spaces, eliminating sticky notes as they do or do not fit into those spaces in between those 4 prompts. And as you get closer and closer to the kind of center of that Venn diagram image, you're getting closer to your ikigai, right? So that's the rough exercise. The art of it for me comes in if and when you get to the right into the center, right, which is the sweet spot. That's where your ikigai lies. Taking a look at the sticky notes or what have you, maybe if you've got a whiteboard, just what you've written up there, looking at that raw data, and then thinking about how you could express that idea, that concept of personal purpose, in a way that is compelling for you, and most importantly, that it's sticky for you, right? That it's something that you're going to be able to take and hold and remember, and then most importantly, apply out in the real world and in your life. So that's one exercise that I've used in the past with this idea of ikigai to great effect, and doesn't cost any money and can be done in 20, 30 minutes, depending on how deeply you want to dive into each of those prompts, and then how quickly I would say you're able to make those connections between the spaces in between. But that's one to consider.
Well, I have my sticky pads and my pens ready, and I can't wait to, go through that. I love that. It's kind of like a design thinking approach to, just
absolutely
kind of free flow with things, to not, edit yourself a lot. And then, there is something liberating about just kind of putting individual ideas on individual sticky notes, because then you can just, eliminate and try to kind of distill down to the essentials.
Yeah, well said. And I would, one other thing that I'll mention too is what's especially fascinating for me is to complete a version of that exercise at different points in time, right? So maybe even in different settings, if that's a possibility, right? And so I've tried to do that, in the comfort of my own home here a couple of times, and then out in different places. We live really close to Rock Creek Park here in DC, and that's one of my favorite parts about the neighborhood in DC where we live is that we have easy access to that beautiful big space. And as I am able to find myself in open space in the wilderness, even though it's still in the middle of DC, I find the way that I think and the way that I approach an activity like that changes completely. So that's something else that I would offer is think about how your surroundings and your environment and the settings can have a big impact, and really critically what might shift, right? What you might think about differently, how you might characterize things differently with a change of scenery.
I'm in complete agreement. And I know it was no accident that I conceived of this podcast idea while I was on the trail hiking,
there you go.
staring at my computer. So, yeah, big fan of that as well. Did you, as you were writing the book, did you bring perspectives, kind of preconceived notions into the writing process that just simply didn't hold up, once you started doing more conversations, reading, research?
Oh yeah, too many to name, I would say. Just to name it, I went through a pretty unique writing and then editing and publishing process. I was a part of a program called the Creators Institute, which is affiliated with Georgetown University here in Washington D.C. And the billboard level version of the story on the Creators Institute is you go from an idea to holding a published hard copy of your book in your hand in 12 months. And I'll never forget the first time I heard that. I said, no, just no way, impossible for anyone, especially for me, right? And I'm a high context person. Takes me time, right? I want to be thoughtful and consider different tasks and ideas and things from 100 different angles, right? Which just results in being slow, basically, when it comes to that. And so at any rate, some of the preconceived notions that I brought into that process, right, which was already blowing my mind, was I know I can write and write fairly well. And that came from my, my previous life. We talked a little bit about the journalism and book editing phases of my career a little bit earlier, but I was astonished at the both the velocity and then the quality at which I was able to produce and then refine and upgrade my own words and my own thinking with the help of someone else. So having a good quality, not just a copy editor, right? I was really fortunate with my publisher, New Degree Press, to have someone that I could bounce ideas off of, right? That gave me real in-depth critical feedback about, this is a cool thing that you're writing about, but I have no clue how it's connected to the rest of your narrative, your hypothesis, or the arc of where you're taking this particular chapter. So I think I was thinking that the book writing process was a far more solitary effort than it actually ended up being, and that little myth that I had in my head was quickly dispelled as I got into it. It's the classic, takes a village sort of idea. The only way that this book came to be was lots of ideas and input and help and belief in me from people at the Creators Institute, at New Degree Press, my publisher, and of course at the Clarion, who I wrote this book in partnership with, a lot of colleagues and mentors at my work as well.
Well, much more to dig into and explore, but I think now is a good time for a short break, and we'll be right back. Here at Firestarter Interactive, we're proud members of the 1% for the Planet network of businesses, having made the commitment to donate 1% of annual revenue to environmental causes. So for every dollar that we earn, 1 cent goes back to planet Earth and our mission to make the world a greener, healthier place for our generation and for future generations. That's $1 of every $100, $10 of every 1,000. It may not sound like a lot, but every dollar adds up. And collectively we can and are making a huge impact, with 1% for the Planet members giving back more than $280 million and counting to the environment. Visit 1%fortheplanet.org. That's 1% for the planet, all spelled out, to learn more. We hope you'll join us. So in doing some research for our conversation today, I came across an interview where you talk about the importance that you place on radical self-honesty and candor. I'd love you to just, reflect on that a little bit. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. I would love to hear how you practice that in your own life, professionally and personally, maybe both on a day-to-day basis as well as applying it to your life big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to talk about there. I'll start off with this idea of being honest with yourself first before you can truly be fully honest with anyone else, to be frank, showed up for me in my professional career and the coaching work that I do at the Clearing specifically. So there's a tool, a framework that we use in our coaching called the Leadership Circle, which is it's a 360 framework, meaning there's a self-assessment portion that someone completes for themselves, and then really critically, there is a similar assessment that goes out to a number of individuals that person actually identifies. So that could be colleagues, bosses, both current or former, peers, their direct reports, right? The people that report to them, et cetera. And the reason that I bring this up is the Leadership Circle expresses the outputs or the outcomes of those surveys and assessments in a visual format. And when I first learned about it, it was kind of this blinding shock of the obvious, because the way that it's set up is a visual overlay of here's how I think about and would, quote, rate myself in a variety of factors, things like empathy and my desire to control my work, my life, et cetera, lots of other factors, right? Both creative competencies and reactive tendencies. And it reflects those things with your own self-rating. And then really fascinatingly, at least for me, is how you rate yourself. And then that's stacked up and kind of compared to the way that other people responded to those exact same questions about you, right? So it's an exercise where you can immediately see at a moment's notice, wow, the way that I think about myself with regard to my need to control something is radically aligned with the way that other people, think about me for those same things, or there's this big gap, right? And then digging into that idea. So, when I actually went through that exercise before I got certified with Leadership Circle, there were some of those areas that just stood out to me, and it was kind of like, another one of those lightning bolts out of the clear blue sky, right? And saying, I have felt something or sensed something in this, this area or that area of my own personality, the way that I think and communicate or approach my work and my life, but I've never been able to put my finger on it. And one of the ideas that I took out of that experience was that there's this, for most of us, I think this shows up, that we have our aspirational self, the version of ourselves that we like to broadcast out to the rest of the world, right? The image that we like to portray. And then to a certain extent, our real selves, our true and honest selves, right? All of the weird warts and scars, so to speak, that we all have as people and human beings, right? All of our imperfections and the things that we're not so good at. And that idea of radical candor and kind of self-honesty, each day that goes by has become more and more important and apparent to me that, right, it's one of those kind of make or break things. So that's something that I try to focus on a lot just in my personal life. And it's one of the ways that I like to really frame up and think about the coaching work that I do. It's also a pretty common thread in the book as well. So that is, that thread is kind of pulled through a few of the ideas, and something that shows up really big for me.
How can big ideas, be a real tool and vehicle for deeper self-awareness and discovery?
Yeah, great question. I think I referred to these ideas as tipping points a little bit earlier. So each of them has had a different but profound impact on my life in some way. Most of them have been bridges that kind of span across my work life, my professional life, and my personal life, right? They're points of connection between those two different facets of who I am as a person. Several of them have been big pivot points that have given me a new mental model, a new way of thinking about something, maybe something that I was really stuck on. And that idea, we talked a little bit about ikigai earlier. For a while in my career, I was really struggling with, I I know how and with whom I can do good and important work, but I'm missing the connection back into uh, what is an intrinsic motivation and drive for me. What is my own personal purpose that I can connect back to a larger organizational mission, or this is the goal or outcome we're after for this project. So that big idea in particular was one way that I was able to kind of short circuit a lot of that really roundabout and circuitous thinking, and just the spinning of my own kind of personal and professional wheels. So I think any one of these ideas can be at a minimum, a connection point or a bridge, and maybe at a maximum, something that helps you make a huge leap, right? Even if it's just a big mental leap from one point, helps you overcome a barrier, think about a problem or a challenge in a new or creative way, and just hopefully kind of ups your velocity, both personally and professionally, so to speak, in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think I know big ideas or ideas in general, like we can also limit ourselves with how we think about the world. Are there, how do we create limits where there don't need to be limits?
That's a really good question. It makes me think of one of the quotes. I'm a big lover of and collector of quotes in addition to ideas, right? And so there's a number of quotes and also some song lyrics in the book that help just drive some of these points that I'm trying to make home for me. One of the quotes that I put in the book pretty early on, just because it felt so important and underpins the hypothesis, right? This hypothesis of democratization comes from an individual named Leila Jana, who founded two very successful social impact companies that employed people in places and paid them wages that were 5 to 10 to 20 times what they would have been able to make otherwise. And so her quote is, talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And those words really crystallized the importance of this idea of democratization. And I think that the limits that get placed on a lot of people sometimes are based on ideas, and sometimes there are these big structural societal limitations that are there through no faults of their own, right? But nonetheless, they have this huge impact on them. So that idea, right, that talent is equally distributed, but people's ability to flex those muscles and express their own talents and their desires and what really makes them tick. Not everyone gets that opportunity, right? So I think the limitations, mental models, structural societal models are all around us, and I think that coronavirus and COVID has sadly only magnified a lot of those inequities. And so these ideas, I hope, right, are ways that people can easily access some of that big, deep thinking. And one quick plug that I'll make is the ebook version of my book is now and always will be 99 cents. So that was about the lowest that I could get it without giving it away, which lots of the outlets would not let me do for some reason. So at any rate, that was a very conscious decision on my part to try to get this thinking, these ideas out into the hands of as many people as possible for as little as possible.
Well, it's a beautiful book, but so owning the print copy is a special experience. But everyone listening should at minimum pick up a copy of the Kindle version, because that's I really appreciate that you have made it available. What advice would you have to folks listening who maybe early in their process of kind of self-discovery, or maybe stuck along what they feel like is kind of resigned to maybe a career pathway that they feel stuck in, but know that there might be something else on the horizon, or someone who is later in their career but contemplating a change? What advice would you have to get in better alignment along their pathway?
Yeah, two things. And the first I would say, which we kind of started out with, right, is getting really tuned into your sense of curiosity. Especially as I observe children, I am struck by how naturally curious kids are, right? They want to know things. They want to learn what this weird thing smells like, tastes like, feels like, and they use every tool that is available to them, right? They kind of bend their will and pull out all the stops to learn about this thing or that thing, or why is the sky blue, right? There's that deep and abiding sense of curiosity present in children. And um, I've been, again, really lucky to work with and interact with and care about a lot of people in my life who have that same, a really similar sense of curiosity as adults. And what happens is, for whatever reason, that curiosity goes away. Maybe it atrophies. Maybe it's beaten out of us, right? Depending on what our life is like, what our work is like, etc. But for whatever reason, a lot of us get away from that. And so one piece of advice I would give to people, especially if you're relatively early on in your career, but really regardless of where you are, is tune back into that sense of curiosity. And think about all of the ways in which you can do that, right? So it's not just reading or asking questions, although those are both great places to start. But remembering all of the tools that you have available to you, right? One of the questions I ask in my coaching work is, what does that feel like? How does that make you feel, et cetera, right? Different versions of that. And I'll get like some wrinkled eyebrows, because it's a strange question to ask people in a professional sphere setting. But I don't think it should be. So I would say, get curious. The other one that I would say is, seek out the people and the organizations that are out there and available wherever you are to help you jumpstart what you care about and help you get in touch with your personal purpose. So that's something that I've, again, been very lucky with, and is just available to different people in different ways. But those organizations are out there, and those people are out there, right? If you invest the time and the energy, ask the right questions of the right people, et cetera, that you can benefit from that too.
That's great advice. And another way I like to think about curiosity is, excitement. What excites you? Where do you feel kind of a natural sense of energy and attraction? Because I think curiosity, sometimes that can feel a little intellectual, feel a little bit like work to some people. But, I think we all feel senses of excitement and kind of gravitational pull towards different areas. And so just really trying to tune into that.
Absolutely.
Well, we're running towards the end of our conversation here, but just a couple rapid fire questions before we conclude. I'm also a quote collector, so I appreciate that we have that in common. Is there a quote or even framework, that you have carried with you in your life that really helps guide you, that's something that you continue to return to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad I have a copy of the book here with me, because the very first quote, in fact, that is at the beginning of my introduction, comes back to that sense of self-honesty and curiosity, right? Which is this beautiful thread that I think we've pulled through the conversation. It's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it goes, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." And that's one of my favorites, right? And one of the reasons why I've taken this deep dive into this really particular facet of management consulting, that is coaching and this advisory work that I do. Human beings are the most complex things in the world. And you could study another person probably your entire life and never know every single thing there is to know about them, right? And that just, I think, piques that sense of curiosity I have, right? That 4 or 5-year-old asking all of those why questions. So that's a quote from Emerson that has always stood out to me. And, a lot of that is sprinkled in the book. There's that liberal arts education shining through again. But that's one that's big for me.
Oh, I love that liberal arts, philosophy of just connecting and, exploring many things. And I think it really, really shines through in your book. It's a really, liberal arts at its best. So, and one more, just reflection is there something that you hold true, know to be true within yourself now that you didn't know to be true at an earlier point in life and maybe you wish you knew a little bit sooner?
Yeah, great question. What stands out for me is, and this is a guiding principle that most good coaches are very upfront about, right? Which is that all of the answers lie inside of you, and realizing that about myself was a big shift for me. I think, like most people, right, and I still do this sometimes today, but we seek answers and insights and fulfillment externally, right, from other people, other sources, and what have you. When in reality, all the answers that we are looking for to all of the questions that we have about ourselves and life and why this, why that, I don't understand X, Y, Z, all of those answers are right in here, right? So that bit about the radical self-honesty, that's one of the reasons why I think that's so important, is because it just gives you access and tunes you into some new and different things that could be a big shift in the way that you work and live. So that's what stands out for me there.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation. I mean, we could just go on and on all day, so I think we'll have to save it for a part 2. But thanks so much for sharing this time together. And how can our listeners learn more about you, learn more about the clearing, and most importantly, find your book?
Yeah, thanks for that. So a few easy ways to do that. First for the clearing, I would hit our website, theclearing.com. It's a easy URL to remember. We're named that for a very particular reason. It's an intentional decision on our part. You can learn a lot more about us there. The other thing that I will say is, in order to find the book, the best way to get a copy of the ebook for 99 cents is still in the Kindle store on Amazon. So check it out there. The book is also available on barnesandnoble.com on the website. If you just search for All Democratizing Big Ideas. I'm also investing a lot of energy into getting the hard copies. If you're in the DC area or anywhere close by listening in, putting a lot of energy into getting those into some really cool local bookstores as well. So that's where I would start. And I would love to talk to anyone out there who's curious. Please reach out to me, and I would love to continue the conversation.
That's wonderful. Well, looking forward to our part 2. But in the meantime, Hans, just thank you so much, and just stay safe and well, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, same to you, Willa. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing another episode of the Firestarter podcast, people, ideas, and conversations that move us forward. If you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, as well as the video of today's show at firestarterix.com/podcast. That's firestarterix.com/podcast. Connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Willa Kammerer, that's Kammerer, and at Firestarterix, and I'm Willa Kammerer on LinkedIn. This is the Firestarter podcast. I'm your host, Willa Kammerer, and I can't wait to share our next conversation. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and let's stay busy making the world a better place.